on Saturday afternoons, and I knew that I wanted to be like Gene Autry. The night that I met George, he came back to a dressing room that a fellow by the name of Rudy Ritchie and I were sharing, dressed in a cape, a black cape with a red satin lining, spouting lines from Cyrano de Bergerac. Magnificent, my nose. I thought, hey, this guy is into something. He must be a real actor. Well, George, when George was interested in a play or a film, especially film, he would really, really, really study it, including the dialogue and how the film was put together, how it was assembled. And the more I got to know him, that is a trait of his that never lost, it never went away from him. He was, in the truest sense, a student of film and also a creative thinker that fit right into the group that he was the leader of. We had our tight little band, but there was no question about the fact that George was the leader. And I think when John Russo first met him, he was another character that night.
Yeah, I met him, I think about a week before I met Russ, because I was at that play with Rudy Ritchie, the fellow that Russ just mentioned. But when I met Rudy and I went to, he said, you have to meet this great guy, George Romero. We're both fine arts majors, and when we're supposed to be drawing the life model in class, he's drawing scenes from Ben-Hur. And so I had to meet this guy. So I'd come home from Christmas vacation at West Virginia University. Rudy and I drove up to George's apartment. Rudy honked the horn, and George came down to the street wearing a huge sombrero, bandoleros full of bullets, 2 pistolas, and a big drooping black mustache. And he got in the car, and we went to get ice cream at a Dairy Queen, and the girl slammed the window shut and wouldn't wait on us. So we just laughed, thought it was hilarious. And the reason he was dressed that way, because one of his favorite movies at that time, in addition to Ben-Hur, was Viva Zapata, which is a great film, and it was starring Marlon Brando. So I always gravitated toward the zany people and the interesting people, the characters, and so I don't know anybody that didn't instantly like George. Such warmth and charm and wit and humor and the zaniness on top of it and so on. But I was thinking about this during the night when I couldn't sleep, and thinking about the star on the Walk of Fame and so on. And I think, George had a kind of restrictive upbringing in New York. He had an uncle named Monroe who owned a medical clinic and had quite a bit of money, but he was also pretty domineering, according to what George told me, because he would insist on taking the whole family to dinner every Sunday. But he was the one who would read the menu, and you're going to have the brisket of beef, and you're going to have this, and you're going to have that. And I think when George came to Pittsburgh, and we're all 18 years old, and just at the time of adolescence, where it's so wonderful to meet friends who think like you do and aren't going to beat you up for thinking like you do, And I think that's why he stayed, because there was this great uplifting burst of energy that came out of the whole group of us. And George was the one that said we could make movies and hooked us right into that. And we stayed with it.
Well, what were the seeds of Night of the Living Dead? You're working on commercials, as far as I understand, and you've got a business where you're making commercials and working on other projects, but you haven't made a feature together yet. And now here's your opportunity.
Correct. Because of the way we were a little bit different. We were nerdies.
And we still are.
when I met George, we were not what you would call ladies' men. We were, yeah, hard to believe. We were a little bit like in the movie Marty. You know, oh, what do you want to do tonight, Marty? Oh, I don't know. What do you want to do? But during that awkward period of time of getting to know one another and feel one another out, we would discuss ideas, many outrageous ideas, out of one of those conversations. And I don't know why this jumped into my mind a couple of weeks ago. One of the early things, we were talking about, well, you know, disappointment and how do you get started and how do you do this and what do we really know about making films and that kind of thing. And I don't know how the topic came up, but I asked him about disappointments and achievement and how would we get that all together. George said to me, I already have some disappointments. And I said, like what? He said, well, I know that there are men's rooms walls in Johannesburg, South Africa, in bars that I will never have the opportunity to write graffiti on. What?
I didn't know that one.
What are you talking about? And it stuck with me. So he had a sense of what was the unattainable. For all I know, at some point in his life, he may have written graffiti on a bar in a men's room in Johannesburg.
Well, you're making me think about the time we would constantly talk about movie ideas even before we had enough equipment to make a feature film, but we were knocking ourselves out trying to get equipment and, you know, killing ourselves doing commercial jobs for very low pay and plowing all the money back into equipment and studio space and so on. One day we sat around in the reception area of our little company and we thought we wanted to make a bank robbery film. And we plotted the whole thing out sitting there probably over an hour or so. And every time we came up to an obstacle of why you couldn't get away with this, we solved the problem. And we had this great script going without writing a thing down. And then all of a sudden we realized we could actually rob a bank and pull it off. Now, if our careers would have taken that turn, we'd probably still be in jail.
But those were the kinds of things we would bat ideas around. But how we decided to start our little company, which was called The Latent Image in Pittsburgh, we had to do something to keep groceries on the table. And George, when he was in New York, he had been a PA on an Alfred Hitchcock movie, North by Northwest. And of all of us, George knew more about film production than we did. He started at a very young age. As a matter of fact, his very first movie production got him into trouble. It was an 8mm, Monroe Udell, his uncle, John mentioned, had an 8mm movie camera, and George was playing with it all the time. And he concocted a movie called Man from the Meteor, and one of the pivotal scenes in Man from the Meteor was that the Man from the Meteor was on fire. George recruited one of his pals in Parkchester in the Bronx to light on fire a dummy and throw this flaming dummy off of the apartment building roof while George filmed an 8mm from below. And he was immediately apprehended by the Parkchester police. And then he had to deal with the police and his mother and father at the same time. But we were always batting ideas around. You know, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? Would this work? Would that work? And out of those, if you will, round table discussions, there was some very, very interesting ideas developed. We started the Latent Image doing TV commercials and industrial films and business films, basically to learn the craft. And as we assembled more and more and more and more bits and pieces of work, the company became relatively successful because we were willing to try to do anything to solve any filmmaking problem, advertising, film related problems, and we became pretty good at it. And it was after, in late 1966, there was a conversation that took place that said, hey, we always wanted to do what we called a real movie. Enough with television commercials already. Not that we wanted to abandon that work, but in addition to, we wanted to do a real movie. George and John were out at lunch one day and concocted an idea, and why don't you?
Yeah, well, I tell that story, but last night I was thinking about some different things, and you know, I got in the middle of Russ and George starting this Latent Image company, which was in a $50 a month flat and a storefront.
Wait a second, it was $65.
$65. Well, they weren't exactly poor then, but that I got drafted, so I'm going into the Army, and Rudy Ritchie and I, before I leave for the Army, we're going to go, I'm going to say goodbye to George and Russ, and so Rudy grabbed a 6-pack of Pepsi out of the refrigerator, his mother's refrigerator, and he popped Jiffy Pop popcorn that you'd shake it over the burner and it would make an aluminum thing like a globe. And I said, why are you doing that? He said, well, George and Russ haven't eaten for 3 days. So we go down to this flat on the south side of Pittsburgh, which was kind of a really low-end district then. And George and Russ were playing a hockey game with levers where you make the hockey guys move and hit this little puck around. And they fed the popcorn to their pet monkey. And they drank the Pepsi. And they said, if we're doing well when you get out of the Army, you have to come and work with us. Well, as pie in the sky as that idea seemed to me, it kept me going through 2 years in the regular Army, and I just couldn't wait to get out and start to work with them. And so that's basically, I taught school for a while, and then I did come to work with Russ and George at Latent Image, and you know, we got heavily into the commercial film business, but always striving to make a feature film.
So I know that you guys were sort of balancing commercials while making this film. What was it like working with George? What was his disposition on set, getting this going while you're balancing all these other projects and doing this over the course of not a linear amount of time?
George was always the kind of person, whether it was a TV commercial that he was directing and producing, regardless of what it was, his attitude always seemed to be, and it's one that I've learned from over the years, George was the kind of director who wanted to let you, the performer, explore how you wanted to portray a role. And he did that with great generosity. It was, he always wanted to see what you were going to bring to the party, and then he would make his subtle adjustments to it if he thought it needed this or that in terms of a character portrayal. But basically, he gave actors their own space. And that is something that stuck with him, as far as I know, on every project he ever did.
Well, the other thing is, you know, the way our company was set up, we only had about 5 full-time people at this little company. And, you know, if Russ was directing, he was also